Welcome, everyone, to Unit 3 of Section 1. This is Podcasting on the Holler. I'm your host, Christopher Epling. I hope you're still excited as I am about creating your own show here on the Holler. That's right, the Holler is going to host your podcast, something that most people would love to have the opportunity to because that costs money, but we're going to get into how audio is stored and shared online a little bit down the road. That's not in today's unit. But in today's unit, we're following up from where we picked off last time. Your last assignment, if you remember, was to pick your format and know your topic. Those two things are very important moving forward. As you know, we also covered the different types of podcast formats in the last show, ranging from solo to mixed to multi-host, so on and so forth. So the different formats are covered, and you should know exactly where you want to go. Now, in order for us to move forward and figuring out what you are going to create, we have to cover themes and genres. These can be a little dense, meaning that, there's a lot in there, but not so much. Formats is really probably the bigger concept here when you compare a theme and a genre and a format. Formats really have nothing to do with your theme or genre, but they needed to be covered. Let's just think of formats as how you're going to create it. And your theme and genres are more along the lines of what are you going to be saying? And a lot of times what you're saying will determine, what type of podcast you're in. So in order for us to really get a grip on this, I want you to first be thinking about this. Now in your mind, okay, deep down inside your head, I want you to be thinking, what is your target audience? Who's going to be listening to your podcast? What sort of interest will these people have? Why are they listening to your podcast? Do they have any questions that you hope to answer, or are you just going to inform them of useless knowledge, which can be fun, that's entertaining? Or are you going to try to do an educational-based podcast where your audience is learning from your expertise? So that's the question I want you to have and keep in the back of your mind. Think of it as something that is going to be like a cloud over top of us, even though on a cloudy day. I don't want you to think it's a gloomy thought, but this cloud is going to follow us, tethered along the whole time we're moving forward. You can think of a person walking along with a cloud tethered to them, and that cloud is the question of, who is your target audience? Okay? Now, a lot of people want to go ahead and jump into podcasting, and they want to think of a name for their podcast. Now, names, a title for your podcast is really important. This ties into themes and genres in the way that you may want to name or title your podcast in a way that fits within the genre you're in. The best example I can really give of this is, think of movie posters. Okay, you go to the movies and you see titles on posters. There's artwork behind it, similar to podcasts. And usually that artwork will support the title or the theme or the topic or the genre of the movie, right? So think of just kind of pulling out of my head. Think of the movie Jaws. So if you see the first early poster for Jaws, there's a giant shark coming underneath a person on the top of the water. Now that sums up the entire genre, which is horror. It ties up the theme, which is going to be, of course, oceanic type predators, right? And swimming in the ocean, the deep, and all that. So the poster sums it up. And think of the title, Jaws, right? So you can't get more specific or more of an indicator of what the movie's about from that. Looking at all those elements, the title and the poster, the artwork. So the podcasts have artwork too. So that's something we're going to be thinking about all along. So tethered to us again, behind us, this will be a balloon this time. You have a cloud and a balloon, right? So your balloon now, be thinking about your artwork and your title of your podcast. Something you're going to be thinking about, along with, of course, our cloud, which is target audience, right? So in order for us to let go of that balloon, we're going to have to name our podcast eventually. And artwork will come along too. We'll be talking about that a little later on, how to create that. So Those are things to be thinking of. Now, in today's unit, we're going to be looking at themes and genres. I want to be real specific here on what these two are and how these two work, okay? So when you're talking about a genre, you need to probably think in your mind about all the different topics and things wrapped into one big blanket. So you have comedy is a genre, crime, podcasts could be a genre, educational based, history, all right? So you have a history-based podcast, horror, science fiction. You have talk podcasts, advice podcasts. You have things on maybe an informative, which could fall into educational, I suppose, but it could be maybe on car maintenance, on how to change your oil or something like that. So the really tricky thing about genres are that you can define a genre pretty simply by saying educational based. But then when you also say, I have a history podcast over here, well, history kind of does fall into educational, right? So there's tiers. There's like, think of it as like the Russian dolls, where you keep having a smaller doll inside a larger doll, all the way down to some little teeny tiny doll that's in the main core of the doll itself. So those unfamiliar with Russian dolls, they're a real thing, and you can see kind of how it works by the animation. But that's how genres kind of work, okay? You have an overall genre. So think of it like this. The giant doll, the giant Russian doll, is podcasting, okay? So that means listening to an audio file in your ear, okay, on the go or at home. That's the larger genre. Podcasting is a genre in itself. When you talk about, listening to audio in your ear, which could be radio, could fall under that. A few more maybe. But underneath that overarching concept of podcasts are all of these other smaller ideas. Okay, you could think of a crime podcast under mystery podcast, right? They could go into maybe unsolved murders or so on and so forth. So you can narrow it down. So be thinking of the genre that you want to work in. Sometimes you start out with your theme, okay? So we're going to talk about themes now. Take notes. This is important. Genres are your overall arcing idea that you can fall into many, many, many categories. But then inside of that is your theme, okay? Now I'm going to break this down for you in a way that kind of helps. Let's define genre first. Genre is a category. This is the definition. A category of artistic composition, as in music or literature, which that doesn't apply to audio or podcasting, but that's okay. The rest of the definition says it's characterized by similarities in form, style, or subject matter. Now there's the real meat and potatoes of the definition that applies to what we're looking at genre in podcasting. A category of artistic composition characterized by similarities in form, style, or subject matter. See, we left out as in music or literature, but when we do that, you can see how it works. Now let's consider the definition of a theme. The definition of the theme says that the subject of a talk, a piece of writing, a person's thoughts, or an exhibition, a topic. So we could call a theme a topic. Now, the reason I've differentiated between a theme and a topic on the show is that, think of the Russian doll again. You can keep going down into the rabbit hole. So you start out with an overall concept, which is your genre of science fiction. From science fiction, you could go into the genre of science fiction. Then you go into the theme of, let's say we're going to be talking about Star Wars. Within Star Wars, okay, our topic could be different types of droids. Within that topic, we could have another topic about maybe one specific type of droid and how their mechanics are and what capabilities they have. And then within that topic, we could probably talk about who makes these droids, how are they manufactured, and so on and so forth. I mean, it could go on and on. But let's not get too overwhelmed. We're just talking about your genre that you're going to be working within. And what are you going to be talking about within that genre? That's pretty much summing up everything, okay? Now, again, let's think back onto some of the different types of examples that we have. And when we talk about the one-on-one interview style that we mentioned, a few of those examples could be the Tim Ferriss Show. Mark Maron has a podcast, The Art of Manliness. Duct Tape Marketing with John Jantsch. That's another one. So these are examples. So there's tons of examples. So when you start getting into actually all these genres, you'll see what happens. And so you can apply the format to the genre, right? So let's think about it and keep within Star Wars again, just because it's easy to talk about and everyone kind of knows about it. So let's think about a one-on-one interview with the genre of science fiction with the theme of Star Wars. And our format could be, like I said, one-on-one interview, talking to someone who knows a lot about Star Wars. It could be even a comic book shop owner who talks about how what people buy within the Star Wars franchise the most. You could have a discussion on that. You could have a solo show where you yourself are just talking about your interest within Star Wars, maybe offering the listeners some really interesting, unknown or not well-known facts. You could have a multi-host show where you and a friend do the same, but then you have interesting transitions. Your transitions could be the sounds of maybe droids beeping or blasters or let's say lightsabers clashing together. So you can have multiple topics like we talked about in the last unit underneath all of these different themes. So it's like a Russian doll, again, a science fiction Russian doll. Think of R2-D2. Then within R2-D2 is another R2-D2, so on and so forth, smaller and smaller until you get to the last one at the core of everything, which honestly, I can't tell you what that is. I think maybe it could be just people love stories, and this all could go and fit into that maybe. But I hope you get the idea of what these are. Now, your first assignment, of course, well, what we ask you to do is be thinking about what you're going to be talking about, and then we ask you to think about the format. And what I want you to do for this unit is, and really seriously do this, within 20 words or less, I would like for you to define what it is your show is going to be about, what it is that you're going to be talking about, and then maybe give a few different examples of some topics too. So what are some of your topics? All right, so that's it for this unit. It's short, sweet, and simple, but it's very important because themes and genres matter, right? All right, so thanks so much for taking the course. We look forward to seeing what it is you create, and I'll be seeing you now in section 2 of the podcast course here on The Holler. Thanks, everybody.